Good morning. We're Masechta Middos. We're up to Perek Hey, Mishnah Gimel. But before we go to Perek Hey, Mishnah Gimel, you should have received, I hope you received, several new diagrams. I'm going to take a look at diagram 49. This is what diagram 49 looks like.
Rabbi, I sent out all the remaining diagrams and all the remaining, so everything that's on in the link now is complete through Thursday, and I sent it out via WhatsApp as well.
Okay, thank you very much, Shmuel. So everybody has this. It's from a sefer called Har Habayis Kihilchasa, and we're going to take a look at some of the Mishnayos we've learned and see what, this is just an example of a picture. There's a tshuva, a famous tshuva of the Radvaz, who was a posek, and he wrote many tshuvas called Tshuvas HaRadvaz. And he had a shaila that was brought to him about the Har Habayis and measuring the Har Habayis and where you can walk on the Har Habayis. And he had that kind of question put to him. And in that context, he wrote a tshuva, and the way to understand the tshuva is to create a diagram. So this is one of the diagrams. If you take a look at the bottom of the picture, it says Tumuna 5, picture number 5, Bir Tshuvas Haradvaz, explaining the Tshuvas Haradvaz. Now the reason I just want to take a look at this picture today is because it's going to help come alive the Mishnayos that we learned. In our Masechta Middos, in the last Perek Dalet, in Mishnah, beginning Mishnah Vav, Perek Hey, Perek Dalet Mishnah Vav, Perek Dalet Mishnah Zayin. And yesterday we learned the fifth Perek Hey Mishnah Aleph, Perek Hey Mishnah Beis. And through all those Mishnayos, we got measurements. So let's for a moment go back to our pictures from yesterday, particularly diagram 45 and 46. Diagram 45 and 46 measured for us the Azora. Okay, it measured the Azora. This is the Ezras Noshim. We're not talking about the Ezras Noshim. We're talking about the Azora. The Azora begins at Shar Nicanor. And then you have Ezras Yisrael, Ezras Kohanim, the Mizbeach, the steps of the Ulam, and the Heichel. The Ulam and the Heichel are a separately built structure inside the Azora. And we did the measurements yesterday. Last week and yesterday, we learned that the Azora and Ulam are 100 by 100 by 100. The Ulam and the Heichel are 100 wide, 100 long, and 100 high. This Ulam Heichel is inside the Azora. Forget the bottom half of the picture. That's Ezras Noshim. This Azora is 187 long, meaning 187 from east to west, from Shar Nicanor until the back wall of the Azora. This entire box, you walk into Shar Nicanor, from that point until the back wall of the Azora, not the back wall of the Heichel. This is the back wall of the Heichel. Between the back wall of the Heichel and the back wall of the Azora, we learned yesterday, there's a space of 11 amos. What we're measuring now is east to west, from Shar Nicanor to the back wall of the Azora, 187 amos. North to south of the Azora, 135. In this area called Azora, 187 east to west, 135 north to south, there's a structure called Ulam that only takes up 100 by 100. Now, in this Heichel, in the Heichel building, the first part of the Heichel is 40 amos long, 20 amos wide. Behind the Heichal is the Kodesh Kodashim, which is 20 by 20. So in the first room of the Heichal, you walk through the Ulam into the Heichal. In the Heichal, you have the Shulchan with the Lechem Aponim on the northern wall, the menorah on the southern wall, and the small Mizbeach HaKtores in the middle. You then had the Amatraxin, we learned about yesterday, the double curtain. Behind the double curtain was the Kodesh HaKadoshim with the Oro. So the first room Heichal is 40 long from east to west, 20 wide, north to south. The Kodesh Kodashim is a square, 20 from east to west, 20 north to south. Now, if we accept the Shita, which is the Shita of the majority of poskim, I don't want to say vast majority, but vast would also be appropriate, but certainly the Shita of the majority of poskim is that this Kodesh Kodashim is where the Dome of the Rock is. How do we know that? Because the Gemara in Yuma says that in the second Beis Hamikdash, the second Beis Hamikdash was missing 5 important things that the first Beis Hamikdash had. One of the things the second Beis Hamikdash was missing, the Gemara in Yuma says, was the Aron. And there's a machlokas what happened to the Aron. Either the Aron was taken by the Babylonians to Bavel. The second opinion is before the Babylonians ever arrived, Yoshiyahu HaMelech took the Aron. Yoshio lived quite a while before the Babylonians, but the destruction seemed imminent. He took the Aron and hid it under the Beis Hamikdash in a tunnel that his great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather Shlomo HaMelech had built in case there was an attack on the Beis Hamikdash, there would be a place to hide things. So there are 2 shittas in the Gemara about what happened to the Aron. That's the Aron that Moshe built in the Midbar, that Moshe Betzalel built in the Midbar, that had the Luchos in it, the Luchos and the broken Luchos. What happened to that Aron? So one sheet in the Gemara is the Babylonians took it. One sheet is it's hidden under the Beis Hamikdash in a tunnel that Shlomo built. So what did they do in the second Beis Hamikdash? For example, when the Kohen Gadol went into the Kodesh Kodashim on Yom Kippur, he was supposed to burn the Ketores, the special Ketores of Yom Kippur. And he was supposed to put it in front of the Aron. But there's no Aron in the second Beis Hamikdash. So where did he burn the Ketores? So the Gemara says that there's an Even Shasiyah, the foundation stone of the whole world. Mimenu hushsas ha'olam, the Gemara tells us, that's the stone from which creation began. And in the Bereshis Shir, we talked about what this Even Shasiyah is. There's a Ramban in Parshas Bereshis about Tohu Vavohu. This Even Shasiyah is the first place from which creation started. And that's what the Gemara describes as this stone that's in the Kodesh Kodashim. And the Aron was on this stone. And when the Aron didn't return for the second Beis Hamikdash, the Ketores was offered at this stone. So we're talking about a stone that marks the Kodesh Kodashim. According to many Shittas, majority of Shittas, that stone that's inside the Dome of the Rock is the Even Shasiyah. Now, what happens if I accept that Shita and I know where the Even Shasiyah is? If I mark the Even Shasiyah, I can now measure out what? I can measure out to the west, to the east, and that has to equal 100. I could measure out from the back 187 to the front, and I can measure out 135 each way. So if I pinpoint the Even Shasiyah, I know that I have a certain amount of space from the Evan Shasiya to the back wall of the Heichal. I have another 11 amos to the back wall of the Azara. I have a certain amount of amos to the front wall of the Ulam. And I have a certain amount of amos until the wall of the Azara Shar Nicanor. And that has to be 187 east to west, 135 north to east. This is what this picture is now showing you as an example. According to Chuvas Haradvaz, look at the numbers they're showing you. They're showing you the Dome of the Rock, and they're showing you, they've created a box around it. It says Kuf Lamed Hey, 135 amos in width. Where did they get that from? From the Mishnah that we learned. And then it says Kuf Pei Zayin Amma, 187. Where did they get that from? The Mishnah we learned. So if the Dome of the Rock is the Kodesh Kadoshim, if the rock is the Makam Aron, then we can even L'chumra use the most stringent shitas and now measure out, not by my hypothetical, but by a Mishnah we learned. It's 187 by 135, and you create that square, and you have the Azara. You measure from the Dome of the Rock or the rock, you create a box of 187 that's going east to west, 135 going north to south, and you have the Azara. It is in this space that no one today is permitted to walk, because you're not permitted to walk in the Azara given our state of Tumah. Anything outside these walls, we begin having the calculation of the Chayil, the Soreg, and that itself has a calculation. What you have to also calculate is if I tell you that it's 187 by 135, that's an amos. How big, how many centimeters are there in an amma? And then again, there are all kinds of shitas. It has nothing to do with the harabayas. Anytime there's a question of an amma, a tefach, there's a machlokas how big an amma and a tefach are. How high can your menorah be? How high can your schach be? What's the minimum size height of a sukkah? What's the minimum width of a sukkah? How many amos? Every time you have an amma or tefach measurement in the Mishnah, there's a machlokes what it is in inches and in centimeters. So if you take the most chumrah shita, you say, I'm just throwing this out. Let's say the chumrah shita is that an amma is 68 centimeters. I'm just throwing out a number. And let's say there's a shita that says an amma is 62 centimeters. And there's a shita that says an amma is 60 centimeters. I take the most stringent shita for our purposes. And I say an amma is 68 centimeters. So I take the Dome of the Rock and I take the rock. I take 180 amos from east to west, 187 times 68. Each amma is 68 centimeters. So I times 187 times 68. For the width, I take 135, I multiply it by 68 centimeters. And then I get to a certain amount of centimeters, I draw a square, and I have the most stringent opinion as to where the Azara is, again, using the assumption that the Dome of the rock is the Kodesh Kadoshim. But once I understand that the rock, or I accept the fact that the rock is the Evan Shasiya, and that is the Kodesh Kadoshim, I then have very simple calculations to make. This is not Einstein math. If the Evan Shasiya is the Kodesh Kadoshim, we learned in a Mishnah it's 187 by 135 for the Azara. and then I'll go as stringent as you want me to go. 68 centimeters, fine. 187 times 68, 135 times 68. Draw me now a box. That's the Azora L'Chumra, and that's where you can't walk. You then have outside the Azora, you're going to have the Ezras Noshim, where we don't walk either. And then you have the Chayil. So this can be drawn out, and any space that's outside the area of Azora or Ezras Noshim, Chayil, is Har HaBayis. Har HaBayis has a separate halacha, as we learned earlier in the Masechta. That's a Machana Leviyah, and someone that's Tomei, Tumas Meis. He came into contact with a dead body. He is permitted to walk on the Har HaBayis. There are other issues with walking on the Har HaBayis, but Tumas Meis is not an issue on the Har HaBayis. Where is the Har HaBayis is an issue, but if you accept the Dome of the Rock as the place of the Kodesh Kodashim, then where you can walk on the Har HaBayis is not a major issue because you can measure it out. And the exact place of the Har HaBayis can also be measured out as well, l'chumrin. So this is just an example. Let me get another diagram that we once looked at. It was diagram 11. Diagram 11 comes from the same sefer, Har HaBayis Kilchasa. It's showing you in gold the Ezras Noshim and in blue the Azora. We now know that this Azora is 187 east to west. Forget the Ezras Noshim. The Azora blue is 187 east to west, 135 north to south. We know that the Ezras Noshim from the Mishnah we learned is 135 by 135. This is an area where you cannot walk today, Ezras Noshim and Azora. And then there's an area around that's called the Chayil, where we don't walk. We know the measurements of all these areas, but we don't know where to measure it from. But once we go to diagram 49, and we accept the majority view that the Dome of the Rock is the Evan Shasiya, then everything in diagram 11 can be measured. The dome, see if we can do this. The dome is inside the blue area. This is Azora. Diagram 49 is showing you an area of 187 by 135. That 187 by 135 is this blue zone. East of that blue zone is the gold zone, which is the Ezras Noshim, which is not shown in 49. But 49, which shows you 187 by 135, is the blue zone, and that's the Azora. And how do you get into the Azora? If you look at the diagram at the bottom, it shows you Shar Nikanor. Okay. So if we go back to our diagram number 3, this box is 187 by 135, and this is the blue zone. This Azora, 187 by 135, forget the Ezras Nashim, 187 by 135 is this blue zone. And in this blue zone was the Mizbeach, the Ulam, the Heichal, Kodesh Kadoshim. That's in this blue zone. The Kodesh Kadoshim has the Oron. In the second Beis Hamikdash, there was no Oron, and they used the Evan Shasiya. That Evan Shasiya is in the blue zone. Where in the blue zone? You go to diagram 49, and that's where the Evan Shasiya would be in the blue zone, and then you measure 187 by 135. This is an example of how we can measure what is on the Har Habayis and what the Yetz Hashem will be there b'mheira b'yameinu. Okay, let's go to diagram 4, just as a brief review. The large green wall is the wall for the Har Habayis. You came into the east if you so choose, Shushan Habira. This area is Har Habayis. You walked through the little gate here. You came to Ezras Noshim. Ezras Noshim, you came to the 15th step, Shar Nicanor. Behind this wall is the Mizbeach. You go up the 12 steps of the Ulam. You're in the Ulam. You walk further in, you're in the Heichal. As we learned yesterday, the front of the building is rectangular. It's an Ulam. It's 11 amos wide. The back part of the building is narrower, and it's symbolic of a lion who has a large head and a narrow body behind. We learned that out from a pasuk that we read yesterday. Okay, let's go to Mishnah Perek, Mishnah Gimel. For Perek Mishnah Gimel, we're going to need diagrams 47A, 47B, and 47C. Okay, diagrams 47, they're all on one page. The Mishnah says, Perek Mishnah Gimel, page 70 of your Masechta Middos. Sheis l'shachos hayu ba'azara. There were 6 rooms, 6 rooms in the Azara. The pasuk, someone's asked for the pasuk. The pasuk is on page 67 of your Masechta Middos. It's a pasuk from Yeshaya, Perek Chaf Tes. Yeshaya, Perek Chaf Tes, pasuk Aleph. Hoi Ariel, Ariel, Kiryat Chana David. Woe to the Ariel. Ariel means Ariel, the lion of God. And so the Ulam and Heichel were built in the form of a lion. Page 67, Masechta Middos, Isaiah chapter 29, verse 1. Back to our Mishnah, page 70. Sheish l'shachos hayu ba'azara. There were 6 rooms in the Azara. What's the Azara? We know what the Azara is. We go back to our diagram 3, and diagram 3 has you walking into the Ezras Noshim, 15 steps Shar Nicanor, Ezras Yisrael, Ezras Kohen, Mizbeach. This is Azora. We just spoke about it at length. 187 east to west, 135 south to north. This is Azora. And the Mishnah is now telling us that inside the Azora, there were 6 rooms. And here, you can see on the southern wall, 6 rooms. And below, on the northern wall, there are also going to be 6 rooms. And the Mishnah is now going to explain what these 6 rooms, what their names were, and what they were used for. 6 rooms, northern wall, 6 rooms, southern wall. Sheish l'shachos hayu ba'azara. There were 6 rooms in the Azara. Shalosh. Now, the next word in the Mishnah is tzafon. That word should be darom. If you look at the bottom of page 70, in the commentary of the Mishnah, underneath Beur, Mishnah Gimel, on the second line right here, at your commentary, at the bottom of page 70, second line, it says, V'yesh gorsim, and there are those who have written at this point in the Mishnah, their girsa is shebadorim. And that's the girsa we're going to go with because that's the Rambam's girsa. What we're discussing first are the 3 rooms on the southern wall. So sholosh batzafim, sholosh badorim, 3 on the north, 3 on the south, shebadorim. On the second line of page 70 Mishnah, instead of the word being shebatzafon, is shebadorim. There are 3 rooms on the southern wall. Lishkat HaMelach, the room of salt. Lishkat HaParva, this has nothing to do with milchik, fleishiks, and parva. Okay, it's called Lishkat HaParva. We'll come to, this is a very interesting name, parva. We're going to learn about what Lishkat HaParva is in a minute. And Lishkat HaMadichen, the room where you did the washing. We go to our diagram number 3. On the southern wall, right, we said we're switching the word Safon to Dorom, and that's the Rambam, and that's what diagram 3 shows you. Dorom, it shows you Lishkat HaMelach, the words are written in, Lishkat HaParva, and Lishkat HaMadichen. So we're going from east to west. The first room, east, right next to the wall of the Azara is Lishkat HaMelach. The middle room, moving west, is Lishkat HaParva. And the most western room in the Azara on the southern wall is Lishkat HaMadichen. We go now to our particular diagram in 47. It's showing you Dorom. It's showing you Lishkat Melach, Lishkat Parva, Lishkat Madichen. And then there are 3 on the northern wall, which we're not going to deal with today. We're dealing with the 3 on the southern wall. We are inside the Azara. This door right here, it says on top of the door, Shar Nikinor, right? In order to get from Ezras Noshim into Azara, you walk through Nikinor. So here's the Nicanor door. You've walked through it, and you're walking east to west. And you're inside the Azara. You're inside that 187 by 135 room. And at the beginning of the 187, you have 3 rooms near the southern wall. The Mishnah now describes these rooms. Lishkat HaMelach, the salt room. What did they do in the salt room? Shasham hayunosne melach lakarban. That's the room in which they stored salt. They needed quite a bit of salt in the Beis HaMikdash. Any offering that was brought on the Mizbeach, the meat had to be salted first. After the carbon was shechted, we learned about they washed it down, they cut it. When they brought the parts of the animal to be burnt on the Mizbeach, they first put it on the ramp to the Mizbeach, and they salted the meat. And you had to salt it before you can put it on the Mizbeach itself. So they needed salt Also, in the morning, before they started the avodah in the Beis Hamikdash, they would take salt and salt the ramp, because they wanted to make sure the ramp wasn't slippery as Kohanim would go up the ramp. So they salted the ramp. They waited a few minutes, and then they removed the salt. Because, as we learned, Kohanim worked in the Beis Hamikdash barefoot. There couldn't be a chatzitza. There couldn't be anything that separated the bottom of their foot from the floor of the Beis Hamikdash. The floor of the Beis Hamikdash, the Ritzpah, is Kadosh. And while they're doing the Avodah, they must be connected to the Kedushas Hamikdash. And they couldn't wear shoes, they couldn't wear socks, they were barefoot. We talked about the fact that the stone floor was quite cold. That's why they had a room where Beis Hamokeh, they were able to go in there, and there was a fire where they can warm themselves up. So they had to be touching the floor. They had to be touching the ground. When they went up the ramp, their feet had to be touching the ramp. So they removed the salt. So they salted it early morning, so the salt would absorb any moisture on the ramp. And then they would take down the salt, and then the Kohanim would be able to go up the ramp. On the ramp were the parts of the animal that had been cleaned, salted. Now the meat was salted and brought for a carbon. So they had this room that contained the salt necessary for the avodah in the Beis Hamikdash, and that's the Lishkas Hamelach. That's the first room on the southern wall. In diagram 47A, it's showing Lishkat Hamelach, the one that has the Aleph on it. It's the southeastern wall of the Azorah. We now move to room number 2. Room number 2 is called Lishkat HaParva, the Lishka of Parva. Now, what did they do in the Lishkat HaParva? First, the top of the Lishkat HaParva had a mikveh, and that is a mikveh that the Kohen Gadol used on Yom Kippur. The Kohen Gadol was tovel in a mikveh on Yom Kippur 5 times. Every time he switched his clothing, he switched clothing 5 times. Yom Kippur clothing for the Kohen Gadol are the Big Day Lava, completely white. Any avoda that was designated Yom Kippur avoda, in other words, the kind of avoda that was done every day of the year was also done Yom Kippur. There was the standard carbon tamid in the morning, the standard carbon tamid in the afternoon. That avoda was not limited to Yom Kippur. When the Kohen Gadol did that kind of avoda, he wore his regular 8 vestments, some of it was made of gold. When he did Yom Kippur avoda, for example, he went into the Kodesh Kodashim with the Ketores. When he did any kind of avoda that was specific to Yom Kippur, he had to change out of the gold and put on the 4 articles of clothing that were made out of pure white linen. And he changed 5 times. First, when he came into the Beis Hamikdash Yom Kippur in the morning, he changed out of his personal clothing into the gold clothing. And then he changed 4 more times, gold to white, white to gold to white. And he did that 4 times. So altogether, he changed clothing 5 times. The first time he changed his clothing was from his daily clothing into the gold clothing. And we're not talking about right now that tevilah. We're going to leave that out for a moment. The next 4 tevilos, where he goes from gold to white back to gold back to white, and white back to gold, those were done on top of the Beis HaParva. On top of the Beis HaParva, we'll soon see how it was built. On top of the Beis HaParva, there was a mikveh. We learn out of a pasuk that the avoda of Yom Kippur, when the Kohen changes his clothing, as we mentioned, he has to be tovel, and the tevilah has to be b'makom kadosh. He can't just go out into any mikveh. The mikveh must be in a holy place. Makom kadosh means azorah. So they needed a mikveh in the azorah, so the Kohen Gadol can be tovel there the last 4 tevilas of Yom Kippur. That mikveh was on the Beis HaParava. Now, what did they do in the Beis HaParava? We spoke about on top of the Beis HaParava, there was a mikveh. In the room itself of the Beis HaParava, they would take the skins, not the meat, the skins of korbanos, and the skins of korbanos went to different people. If it was Kodesh Kadoshim, if it was a korban that was of the high level sanctity, a chatas, an asham, an olah, the skins of those animals were divided amongst the Kohanim who served in the Beis HaMikdash that week. The Mishmar, one of the 24 Mishmaros, whichever one was there that week, they divided the hide of the karbonis, that of the Kachei Kadoshim. Hides of animals that are Kachim Kalim, the lower level karbonis, Atoda, Shlomim, those karbonis, the hides belong to the owner of the carbon. We're talking now here in the Beis HaParava, there was a room, it was the room where they took the hides that would go from the higher level, that came from the higher level animals, the higher level karbonis, and would go to the Kohanim. They salted the hides in this room, Beis HaParava, so that the hides would not go bad. You salt hides, it's part of a tanning process. You salt the hides, you preserve the hides, and that's where they took the hides of the Kachei Kadoshim and salted them to maintain it. So the Mishnah says, Lishkas HaParva, Sham Hayu, we're on page 70, Lishkas HaParva, Sham Hayu Molchen Oros Kadoshim, that's where they salted the hides, Al Gaba, Al Gaga, and on the roof of the Beis HaParva, Hayu Beis HaTfilah, that was the mikveh, LaKohen Gadol, we're on page 71, Biyom Kippur. It was for the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur. Now here, we're going to do two things at the same time. We're going to discuss why this place is called Beis HaParva, the Parva room. What did they do in the Parva room? They put salt on the hides of Kodshei Kadoshim, and on top of the room, they had a mikveh for the Kohen Gadol for Yom Kippur. So why is this place called Beis Parva? So we're going to now discuss why it's called Beis Parva. And once we understand why it was called Beis Parva, we're going to understand also there are two opinions as to how this room was built. The Gemara in Yuma says, this is going to sound very strange, but everybody hold on for just a couple of minutes. It says Parva was the name of an Amgusha. Amagusha is a warlock for our terms. He's a person that knows witchcraft, and the Gemara calls in the Babylonian language, the Aramaic, warlock or a person that knows witchcraft is called Namgusha. There was an Amagusha whose name was Parva. This has nothing to do with milchiks, fleishiks, and parva. And please don't think when your wife says it's parv, do not think about witchcraft. It has nothing to do with witchcraft. Okay? Pariv, and that's why people careful. The food is not parva, because then you start thinking about witchcraft. The food is pariv, P-A-R-E-V-E. It's pariv, and that's different than parva. Parva brings to mind the Amgusha of Masechta Yuma. Who is this Amagusha? They named this room, Beis Parva, they named it after this Amagusha. Why did they do that? So there are two reasons. One reason is he built the room. He did tshuva from being a warlock. He did tshuva from performing witchcraft. And he wanted to build this room. He donated to build this room, and he built this room. So they called it after him, and his name was Parva. So it's called Beis Parva. There are some Mefarshim that say an extraordinary thing, and they say not only did Parva build this donate or build the room, he put the room together through witchcraft. He built it through witchcraft, to which the other Mefarshim jump and say it is absolutely impossible that there's a room in the Beis HaMikdash that was constructed by witchcraft. So we're going to leave that Shita out. So one Shita says that it's called Beis HaParva, in which they salted the hides, on top of which there was a mikveh, because an Amagusha, a warlock, did tshuva, and he built the room or donated money to have the room built, and they named it after him. One Shita. The second Shita is even more fascinating. This Amagusha, we're still talking about an Amagusha, and we're talking about a guy by the name of Parva. The first explanation, the second explanation, Parva is a warlock. The first explanation is he did tshuva, built or donated to build the room. The second shot is that this Parva, this Amagusha, never did tshuva. And he was digging a tunnel from outside the Har HaBayis. He was digging a tunnel under the Har HaBayis, under the Azara, and he was continuing to dig. And he wanted to build a tunnel so that he can get under the Kodesh Kodashim, because he wanted to be able to lift his head secretly into the Kodesh Kodashim while the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur was doing the Avodah. So you can see exactly what this holy thing is about the Ketores in the Kodesh Kodashim, and maybe that would help him with his witchcraft. So he wanted to learn about Ketores in the Kodesh Kodashim, and he was digging a tunnel under the whole Beis HaMikdash to get to the Kodesh Kodashim. They discovered the digging right there in your picture, 47a. They discovered his digging right where that room was, or right where that room, right there, that room. They discovered him digging there. They pulled him out of there, and they did whatever they did to him. And to remember the miracle that they discovered this Amgusha digging under the Beis HaMikdash, they called this room Parva. Okay, so two Shitas in the Gemara. Both Shitas are that Parva is an Amagusha. He's a warlock. The first shot is he did tshuva, and he wanted to build a room, so they named the room after him. The second shot is that this Amgusha wanted to dig a tunnel. He got all the way to that point in the Azora. He wanted to get to the Kodesh Kodashim to see the Avodah of the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur. He was discovered in that area, and they called the place Beis HaParva. Okay. Now, we're going to have two shitas about how this Beis HaParva and the mikveh above it are built. But before we get to that, I'd like to continue on page 71 so we can finish the Mishnah for today. There's a third room. If we look at diagram 47a, we said, the Mishnah said there are 3 rooms on the northern wall of the Azara and 3 rooms on the southern wall of the Azara. We're on the southern wall. We talked about the first room, Lishkat HaMelach, the salt room. The second room is Beis HaParva. We don't know how that's built yet, but we know it's the second room. And the third room, which is more to the west, is Lishkas HaMadichim. That's the washing room. What did they wash in there? The Mishnah on page 71 says, Lishkat HaMadichim, Shesham Hayu Madichin Kirvei HaKadoshim. That's where they washed out the insides of karbanos. Now, this is not to be confused, although it can be confused. We go back to diagram 3. We learned that in the Azara, to the north of the Mizbeach, there were rings where they were able to hold the animal's neck down for shechita. Further north, there were tables, and on these tables, they were able to wash the insides of the karbanos. This is areas called shulchanot, the table, and they washed down karbanos. Now we're learning about a room inside the Azara, which is called Madichin, and it says again they wash down the karbonos. And the Gemara explains to us, we're not going to go into detail, it deals with different insides of an animal. Certain insides of the animal will wash down here, outside the Heichal. They will wash down in the Azara on the tables. And certain insides of the animal were brought into the Heichal, brought into here. So look what we're looking at. Here's the Mizbeach. The animals were slaughtered here at the rings. The animal was taken, and part of the animal was washed. The inside was washed down on these tables. It went from here to here. The animal went from the Mizbeach north, and part of the animal was taken in, went east to west into the Lishkas Hamadichem. Other inside parts of the animal were washed there. The Mishnah now continues on page 71. Umisham, and from inside the Lishkas Hamadichem, the washroom, Masiba Ola Lagag Beis HaParva, a circular staircase. We learned about circular staircases. A circular staircases went up into the Beis HaParva. The Beis HaParva and the Lishkat Hamadichem are right next to each other. Diagram 47a. The first one, Aleph. First one, Aleph. Lishkat HaMelach. The second one, Beis HaParva and Lishkat HaParva. And the third one is Lishkat HaMadichem. And in this Lishkat HaMadichem, there was a circular staircase to get up to the Beis HaParva. We said that on the roof of the Beis HaParva, there was a mikveh that the Kohen Gadol was tobeling. Well, how did he get up to that mikveh on the roof of the Beis HaParva? He got in because in the Madichin, the next room, there was a circular staircase that brought you up to the roof of the Beis HaParva so the Kohen Gadol can get up there. In order to understand the staircase and the two opinions, we have to take a look at diagram 47b first. Take a look at 47b. We just entered Shar Nikanor. The first room is Lishkat HaMelach. The second is Parva. And the third one is Madichin. And Parva has a mikveh on top of it. We don't know what on top of it means yet. And that's the two shittas we're going to learn about. The first shitta is the shitta of Tosfos. The shitta of Tosfos is 47c. First, let's explain what Tosfos is trying to accomplish. In order for the Kohen Gadol to do his 4 tevilos on Yom Kippur, he has to do it, we said, b'makom kadosh. V'rochatz es b'saro b'mayim b'makom kadosh. That's what the pasuk says. He shall immerse himself in water in a holy place, which means he can't go to any mikveh. Holy place means inside the Azara. So the Azara had a mikveh, which is on top of the Beis HaParva. But now we have a problem. The rule in the Beis HaMikdash is, and these are rules described in Masechta Meiser Sheni, Gagin va'aliot lo niskadshu. The roofs or the attics that are built in the Beis HaMikdash do not have the kedusha of Beis HaMikdash. They are not considered Beis HaMikdash for purposes of the highest levels of kedusha, for simplicity. So now we have a problem. Let's assume, going back to diagram 47a, let's assume that you have the room of the salt, Lishkat HaMelach, Lishkat Beit HaParva, you have a room where they salted the hides, and on top of that room they had a mikveh. Now, if the Beis HaParva is a room above ground, And on top of the Beis HaParva, they built a mikveh. That mikveh is now built on the roof of the Beis HaParva. The roof of the Beis HaParva is not holy. It doesn't have the level of Kedusha of Azara, because the rule is the roofs and the attics of structures in the Beis HaMikdash do not have Kedusha Beis HaMikdash. So the Beis HaParva, which is built on the floor of the Azara, right? The Azara, let's assume that the Beis HaParva, is a room, and the room is built on the floor of the Azara. The room is holy. The roof of the Beis HaParva is not holy, because the roofs are not holy. And if you put a mikveh on that roof, the mikveh is not considered holy. It's not considered built in the Azara. So if the Kohen Gadol goes into the mikveh on top of the Beis HaParva, he didn't accomplish anything, because he has to immerse himself in Makom Kadosh. And by building a mikveh on the roof of the Beis HaParva, the roof of the Beis HaParva is not a Makom Kadosh. So how was he able to immerse himself there? That becomes now a problem. Tosfos therefore introduces a big chiddush, which is 47c. Tosfos says, yes, the first room, Lishkat HaMelach, was built on the floor of the Azara. Parva was a room that was beneath the floor of the Azara. So you're now below the floor of the Azara, and therefore the Beis HaParva is holy. Now, where's the mikveh? The mikveh is on top of the Beis HaParva. If the Beis HaParva is below the ground, where is the mikveh? The mikveh is right on the floor of the Azara. Obviously, it has a wall around it for tznius purposes. But the mikveh is not on the roof. Look at this picture. Instead of the Beis HaParva being equal height to the Beis HaMelach, and the mikveh being on top of that, which causes a problem because roofs are not holy, the Beis HaParva is below ground, and the mikveh is on the floor level of the Azara, and therefore it's holy. So therefore, the picture is now showing you the lishka of the Beis HaParva being below the surface of the Azara, below the floor of the Azara, and right above the floor of the Azara is the mikveh, which means the mikveh is on the floor itself of the Azara, and therefore it's holy. According to Tosfos, he continues that the third room, Madichin, is also below the floor of the Azara. The way you got into Madichin is through a staircase. Now, how did you get into Parva? That's really nice that the Parva is below ground, but there's no door there. How did you get into Parva? So Tosfos explains, Madichin is below the ground as well. Madichin, the third room, has a staircase. You go down the staircase, and now in this room, you can wash the insides of the korban. Between the two rooms, Madichin and Parva, there was a door, and that's how you got into Parva, and that's where you would salt the hides. And inside of Madichin, there's a circular staircase that would bring you to floor level so that the Kohen Gadol can go into the mikveh on top of Parva. All this is now shown in 47c. In 47c, you can see of the three rooms that are on the southern wall of the Azara, the salt room is the only one above the floor. The second room, Parva, where they salted the hides, is below the floor. The mikveh is above the floor. Well, how do you get into Parva? Madichin, the third room, is also below the floor. There's a staircase from Madichin to go into Madichin, and now you're in the place where you can wash out the insides of the korban. If you need to salt the hide, There's a door between Madichen and Parva. You go into Parva, and now in here you can salt the high. But how do I get into that mikveh? The mikveh is here, floor level, but it's enclosed. You obviously can't have a mikveh on the floor of the Azora where everyone can see what's going on there. So there's a wall around the mikveh. How do you get in there? You can't get in from the parva because the parva has a ceiling on top of it. You got in because they're showing you a masiba. You can see it there. There's an arrow there, and it's a circular staircase in Madichen that brought you up to floor level and into the area of the mikveh. And this is where the Kohen Gadol would be able to be tovel the last 4 tefillos on Yom Kippur. So those are the 3 rooms on the southern wall. If we go back to 47b, Lishkat Hamelach, Lishkat Parva, which according to Tosfos is below the surface, below the floor. The mikveh is at floor level. The next is Madichen, which is also below the floor. Therefore, it had a staircase, 47c, to get into it. There's a doorway between Madichen and Parva, so you can get into Parva to salt the hides. And Madichen has a circular staircase to be able to go in, for the Kohen Gadol to go into the mikveh. So those are the 3 rooms on the eastern wall of the Azora. We'll continue tomorrow with additional information about the 3 rooms on the southern wall of the Azora, and some interesting historical information about this Lishkat HaParva. And Blinad will do the next Mishnah tomorrow, the 3 rooms on the northern wall of the Azora.